Hey folks, welcome back to Only Best Fancy Novels. My name is Robin, and today it's time to finally finish off this list. None of these picks are going to be new to you. One of them might be. It's certainly not as widely known as the other 9 in this list. But, so I'm not going to waste time introducing any of these to you. I'm just going to talk about why they make the list. And at number 10, I have Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, the 15 books that comprise that entire series that she's written over the course of her career under the pen name Robin Hobb. And what else is there to say about these books other than, just the incredible character work that she's put together over the course of these novels. Like, following Fitz and Fool over the course of Fitz's life, essentially, in the first trilogy, when we're introduced to him, and we go through his Bildungsroman, essentially, then into the Tawny Man trilogy, where their story just develops that much further, and the way that just following Fitz on the trials and tribulations of his life, and the twists that has taken, and his interaction with the Fool, and all of that. Like Robin Hobb has that signature character work that she's well known for. Probably well less known is the fact that it seems like a very common thing for 90s female fantasy writers to be very brutal when it comes to their characters. And I'm looking at people like Jacqueline Carey, Kate Elliott, and Mercedes Lackey when I'm thinking about that particular pattern. Robin Hobb is, in that regard, Robin Hobb is certainly not unique, but the way that she does the journey that we follow fits over the course of those 9 books. It really stands out to me. It was the first. It was my first. My first experience with that particular type of storytelling, and that's why to this day it still resonates with me. And then, of course, setting aside the 9 books that focus on Fitz and the Fool, we have the 3 that comprise the life ship traders, which might very well be my personal 3 favorite novels of the entire realm of the Elderlings. Even though it doesn't focus on Fitz and the Fool, we get a story of let me not get into that. But they're following that part, exploring that particular aspect of this world, and the life ships and how they work, and that kind of thing. And once again, that deep character story that we have, and that just the trials and tribulations of that particular merchant family, and just so many moments in that trilogy. Like that one is a deeply complex family story. It was just enjoyable from start to finish, and of course there was the flavor of the mythic in it. With if you know, you know. And then finally we have the quartet that comprises the Rainwell's books, which I personally don't find as bad as most people seem to. Like the standout thing for me with that quartet was discovering how this world works in terms of the dragons. And yeah, it could have. It's not like the best series it's not the best sub-series within Realm of the Elderlings, but I certainly didn't find it as bad as most people did. And when I think back on the body of work as a whole, these 15 books, they're just some of the best fantasy that I've read. When I think of how deeply I was just engaged, the way that the characters and the journeys just resonate, like they just captured me and that kind of thing. That's why Robin Hobb just absolutely deserves a spot on this list, even though she's at number 10. But yeah, at number 9, I have Marie Brennan's Memoirs of Lady Trent. And this might be the series that most people don't really know from this list. And we essentially follow follow Lady Trent, who is the first female natural historian in her world, and her over the course of 5 books, we follow her story as she sets out to learn more about dragons from a very scientific, a very academic approach, and we follow her in a series of journeys going to different locations to learn about different species of dragons. And over the course of her journey, she becomes embroiled in a deep mystery surrounding dragons and the way that they interacted with her world. and it culminates in her unlocking her discovering the secrets of a legendary race, essentially. So so it's a very different type of series. It has all the hallmarks of epic fantasy in the sense that we have high fantasy, we have a lot of politics, we have a lot of intrigue, we have this mystery, we have this this quest for an epic we have an epic quest of sorts, not the traditional war focused or good versus evil kind of thing, but instead one of knowledge, and that and of course we have just following Lady Trent herself, who is a character and a half. And the reason why this particular series makes a list is because when the series was first published, it was right at the time when I was very saturated with epic fantasy as a whole. It felt like the majority of the books that were being published in the fantasy genre were just stock epic fantasy with the same story with just a different coat of paint attached. So I was starting to get very saturated with epic fantasy as a whole. It was, if there were fantasy books being written that were outside of that canon, they were difficult to come across. And then this came about, and it was such a different story, such a different concept. I just fell in love with the idea right away, and then the book just absolutely blew me away. And then on top of that, the book itself is also just a wonderful package, because you get like it because of the fact that it has a scientific, we explore dragons through a scientific lens in the story. There's diagrams and these kind of diagrams and sketches and lots of pictures that are part of just the general experience of the book. So like that was the first time I had experienced something like that, and it just it really it was one of those series that for me was very it showed me that fantasy could be a hell of a lot more than just epic fantasy, just dudes with swords killing each other and whatever. And it's one of the series why to this day I will give pretty much any interesting fantasy book that comes across my plate a try. And I not just give it a try, I'll actively look for books outside of the standard genre fare. So that's why this series is at number 9 for me. And it will always be a favorite series because it's a bang of a story on top of all of that. Like Lady Trent is a character, to put it mildly. Yeah, at number 8 I have Fond Lee's Greenbone Saga, and what needs to be said about this particular one? We follow like most people, I just fell in love with this story that Fond Lee put together here for us with the warring clans and the way that Jade works in this world, and the just so many different layers of ideas and themes and concepts that we play with, with the nationalistic bent and the way that these clans work and the way that the society works and these characters and the trials that they go through and these kind of things. And I love the bait and switch. One of my personal things that I loved was the bait and switch. We're initially introduced to this character and we kind of get the vibe that, okay, he's going to be like the main character, and then there's a switch. And we end up following this other one who I wasn't quite ready for, I wasn't quite sure who I liked at the time, and then just reading his story as he was forced to evolve based on that situation, it's just a really great story, like most people. The Godfather is one of my favorite movies, so to see that kind of story given the fantastical twist and just the way it's done in here is just one of the best series I've personally, for me, one of the best series I've ever read, and it's why I'll probably read anything Fond Lee writes in the coming future. Whether I come across a synopsis and it even sounds like something I will not like, I will pick up that Fond Lee book. So that's my number 8 pick. At number 7, I have Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, and yeah, it's not top 3, top 5, whatever. But the thing with this series is that, following Game of Thrones, it's the first epic fantasy series I've after reading Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, I should say, which was my introduction into fantasy. This was the very next epic fantasy series I picked up, and that prologue at the start of the Eye of the World well, after reading what happens in the prologue, I was like, okay, I can get behind this, and I just got swept away in this just absolutely massive epic. And like most fans, I just had a blast with it, from all through the highs, all through the lows. You know, I made it through the slog. It wasn't until after the slog. Well, during the slog, I was kind of going along with it. I wasn't as captivated as I was with the early books, and I certainly wasn't as captured with it as I was with the later half of the later third of the series. But when I think back on this story as a whole, and just the way that it kind of shaped me as a fantasy reader, and the things I look for when it comes to epic fantasy and all of that. Like, this series will always be one of my favorites, for good or bad. Whether you want to read it is up to you. It's not a series it's not a series I really recommend anyone read, given the investment and the slog and all of that. If you have an interest in it, absolutely go for it. I personally consider it one of the best epic fantasy series ever written, for the simple fact of the ambition, the sheer scope of everything that happens here. Like, you know, the slog it is what it is, but and you can argue as to its relevance and when it has a plot and it doesn't have a plot and all of that. Having read this more than 15 years ago at this point, I don't think back on that aspect of it as a negative. I just think back on the series as a whole, and the amount of hours I spent enjoying the story, and that's why this series is at number 7 for me. At number 6, I have Terry Pratchett's Discworld, and these 41 books were all over the place for me when it comes to fantasy. Some of them I just really love. Some of them I struggled with. You know, Terry Pratchett just had a very interesting imagination, and the way that he decided, the way that his books evolved over the course of writing these 41 books, and the ideas that he played with, and just the one-liners and the comedy, and just the way that comedy was introduced in here. You know, like, this series has everything for me. When I think of when I think of what fantasy can do and the stories it can tell, for me, Discworld is a series that contains everything in one way or another. Like, it can be a standard fantasy story. It can be one that's critical of a certain section of society. It can be one that's critical of so something or the other. Like, so at some point or the other, it is baked into this world, and of course the humor. You know, like, there's some of the. I'm not the person that, like, cracks up very often where it comes to humor in books, but reading this world, there were many just these single one-liners that Terry Pratchett will drop that just broke me, man. It just had me laughing. It's an experience, and of course, over the course of these different novels, you know, Terry Pratchett takes us on in so many different directions, and there's so many different things, because the books do evolve as he evolved as a writer. So it's a series I very much want to reread again, even though it hasn't been that long since I finished reading them, just because of just the range of the range of content that Terry Pratchett covers in these 41 books. So yeah, that's why it's at number 6 for me. At number 5, I have Harry Potter. You know, like, this was my like, I feel like, from similar to millions of readers worldwide, this was my kind of introduction this was kind of my introduction to the fantasy genre at a younger age. Back then, before I read the series, when I think on it, I mainly read, like, horror in terms of R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike, or mystery in terms of, like, Hardy Boys, and then I was starting to transition into thrillers. So you can think, like, names like Dean Koontz, Stephen King, Tom Clancy, those kind of books. And then along came Harry Potter, and this was one of the series that got me, that kind of introduced that. Not one of the series. This was the series, when I think on it, that really introduced to me fantasy and all it could be and all it could do. And and like so many millions of people along around the world, you know, I got swept up in Harry's story, and it is what it is. Like it will always be one of my favorite series. It like my wife is a devoted fan, and it's a rare. I won't even say week. It's a rare day that something Harry Potter related isn't discussed in our household. From whatever she sees on social media or whatever she wants to buy and that kind of thing. So it's very much a series that is near and dear to not just me but my family as a whole, and it will always be a favorite series. It will, regardless of what the direction that things have taken with the author and all of that. Like it is what it is. At number 4, I have John Abercrombie's First Law, and what else can I say about John Abercrombie? But over the course of these 9 books, these 3 trilogies, you know, like Joe is a writer that he stands out, to put it mildly. At the time when I first read the First Law books, it was a very different type of story than what I'd ever read, because I went into it here when I first read it. You know, grimdark was the buzzword that was being thrown about at the time. It was a fairly new thing. I hadn't read any grimdark books before it, or books that I identified as grimdark at least, for marketing purposes. And then you read this story that Joe puts together, and it isn't necessarily the connection wasn't with the story, but it was with just Joe's writing, Joe's way of narrating, of telling the story. Just the way that the humor and the cynicism is baked into it. And it's something, it's why even the books of his that never matched the First Law for me, and I'm directly thinking of The Devils and his Shattered Sea trilogy here, even those books that aren't First Law, just that style of writing that he has, and the way that he narrates things, and the way that he has us as the reader view things in this world that he's created. That's why this series is always going to be one of my favorites, because you can have your characters go through the same scenario that so many other characters go through, but the way that you portray it, and the way the spin that you put on it, and the way that the lens that you give readers to view this story through is what matters. Is what makes the difference as an author. And Joe has a very unique lens that he has us view his stories through. So, you know, like, what else is there to say? If you've read a Joe Abercrombie book, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're one of those readers more focused on the plot or focused on the character, might not necessarily resonate as well with you. But if you're someone who just reads line by line and just thinks on some of the more interesting phrases that drops in a book, there's no way you can't enjoy some of the bangers that Joe just drops over the course of this series. And that's why this series will always be a top 5 for me. And it's something. It's a quality thing is writing that has just evolved over and over. With each, like, you can see the improvement with each book, because the First Law trilogy, you know, it introduced us to this intense cast of characters, this intense style of writing, and then we have the 3 standalones that they all do their own thing, but they do it in that very Joe Abercrombie kind of way. You know, the 3 standalones includes the Heroes, which might be my favorite of all the First Law books, my single favorite of all of them. And then of course we have the Age of Madness trilogy, which I've seen so many people argue that the Age of Madness is just the perfect fantasy trilogy, and I will not argue with that statement. I will not argue with that statement in any way, shape, or form. Because when I try to think of an issue I have in that trilogy, I cannot think of a single thing. I cannot poke a single hole in it. If there is one, I can't. I genuinely cannot think of what there is that might be wrong, or I cannot think of a flaw when it comes to that series. So, yeah. I like Joe Abercrombie. Anyway. At number 3, I have Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. And this series is... Like, this series makes the cut for me here because there was a very long period where I was very burnt out with reading fantasy. Like, I read epic fantasy from when I was first introduced to Game of Thrones, leading into the release of Dance of Dragons. And then after that, I read epic fantasy for so many years. And I got burnt out on it. And that's when I started to discover books like Memoirs of Lady Trent, like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, Lord of the Mist, China Mieville, The Scar in particular. That book, that book just completely broke fantasy for me. Like, that book was the book that broke fantasy for me. After that, I read a few other series and I just gave up on fantasy because nothing could match what I'd read in The Scar. And so there was a period in my life after that for like maybe 4 to 5 years where I didn't read much fantasy, if any at all. I kept up with the occasional new release, mainly Mark Lawrence and whatever. And then I just randomly picked up Stormfront. I came across it, I just picked up Stormfront, started reading it, and I was hooked. I was hooked right away because it followed, like, before I was a fantasy reader, I was a mystery reader. I was a thriller reader, that kind of thing. And Dresden Files just clicked for me because it felt like just the perfect fusion of all the genres I'd read. That were my favorites to read throughout my entire reading life. And of course, this is Dresden Files. The humor, the action, the pace, and all of that. You know, it had me going. It hooked me, and from the very first book, for 2 weeks straight, because I think at that point, the most recent one that was released was Cold Days. Every day I read one Dresden Files book for basically 2 weeks straight. I'm caught up in the series, and that's a testament to how hooked I was with it. And this was a series that brought me back to fantasy and got me hooked on reading fantasy again. And you know, like, you can say what you want to say about Harry and his flaws. You know, no series is perfect. Everything has, well, except maybe Age of Madness. No series is perfect, but when I think of just the sheer joy that the series brought me as a reader, and the way that it just deeply engaged me, and of course the whole arc leading into changes and all of that. You know, like, this series is, for me, will always be one of the best in the genre. And it's definitely a series I also need to reread again at some point to see if... because it's now been a number of years since I first read it, and yeah, what else is there to say really and truly? So that's why number 3 is Dresden Files. And now we're down to the last 2. Honestly, pick a day, and these can flip between one and the other. But right now, I think I'm very much solidified on their positions. Especially given how the way that some of the more recent releases have trended. I don't think it's going to be undone anytime soon. I don't think so. I think it's going to be a number of years before they really flip again. But at number 2, I have Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, because I really don't consider his series as series that should be singly read anymore. It's become too interconnected. He's certainly not the first author to interconnect his books in series and all of that. But in his case, the way that he's chosen to interconnect the series, I personally think that you can't read them singly anymore. So I will just think of all of his books as one massive series. To hell with it. But yeah, like, the reason why Brandon Sanderson for me is at number 2 is because as much as I enjoy reading widely in fantasy, and I look for stories that are different, that are unique, that are creative, that go so far out of the box. Like, those are my favorite stories to read every year. The the books that really keep me going reading as a fantasy reader are epic fantasy. You know, they were my first exposure to the genre, and they still remain the largest swath of the genre that I read. And for me, Brandon Sanderson is the best epic fantasy writer that writes today, and mainly because of his world building and the sheer imagination that he exhibits in that and all of that. There's and even his stories, like his story. When I think of what Elantris does compared to what Miss Bourne does, when I think of what Warbreaker does as compared to Stormlight Archive, you know, he has like some of the he has certain elements that remain that are the same throughout his book, and I'm not talking about things as superficial as how his magic works and all of that. I'm thinking of the idea of the role that religion always plays in his books, the role that these I won't get into that actually, but when I think of just the way that he writes these books and the stories that he has to tell and all of that, like there's of his Cosmere connected books, I can't think of a single one that I actively dislike. I can't think of a single one that was just an okay read for me. Every one of them I enjoyed for one reason or another, and I enjoyed quite a bit. Even Wind and Truth. Like I'm one of 3 people on the internet who actually liked Wind and Truth. So yeah, that's why Brandon Sanderson is at number 2 for me. At the same time, you know, he has begun to skirt the line and do some things that personally I don't like as a reader, and that's why I feel like he's going to be very definitively number 2 for me, for the near future, for quite a while until maybe something changes again, because that's one thing about Brandon Sanderson. He's constantly evolving. He's constantly as much as he has a very standard way of how he does things, he's also constantly evolving. So I'm very interested to see where he goes as he progresses with his Cosmere books. And then at number 1, I have Stephen Erickson and Ian C. Esselman with Malazan, because if you've read even a single Malazan book, you understand. You know why this series is at number 1. This series does not need an introduction. This series does not need me talking about my love of it all over, or venting about it all over again. But when I think about just when I think about Malazan and just the sheer immensity of what Erickson pulls off, not just in Malazan Book of the Fallen, but what he does in the Carcanus trilogy, in the Botchlane and Corbin Broach books, in the Witness trilogy that's happening right now, which the Witness trilogy, the first 2 books out there, oh my god, like if you like Malazan Book of the Fallen, anyway, we're starting to go down a rabbit hole. Like when I think of Erickson and what he does with these characters and the story that he tells and just the ideas that just are baked into his story, like oh my, yeah, you get it. You get it if you've read it. And Ian C. Esselman just comes in with the alley-oop, with the books that he writes as well, like and just the way that they complement the main series and the stories that they tell and the additional fleshing out that they do, and the way that they and even though they tend to be very tangential to what I think of like the core characters and the core story of this world, like even though they tend to be very tangential, like just the way that they flesh out this world and just add like a further layer, a further bit of complexity to just this ongoing saga. Like this is a world built on and conceived on another level. This is a world whose stories are told on another level, and because of that, and this once again, similar to how Joe Abercrombie has that unique lens that we get to experience all of this through, Erickson also has a lens. Like I read these books and enjoyed, but there's just so much more here to enjoy. Like just the complexity of these books and the complexity of this series. Like it for me, it stands above and beyond anything else written in fantasy. It stands above and beyond even something like the Cosmere, where yeah, it has its own complexity, but that's main. The complexity in Brandon Sanderson's world is just world building. The complexity with Malazan is more in terms of themes and ideology. So like between all of that, that's why for me Malazan will probably always be number one. And now and then Brandon Sanderson will write something that'll make the Cosmere go, but I don't think it'll ever stay. It'll ever stay my favorite series. I think I will always come back to a Malazan book, and this entire body of work that these two have put together over the course of these 26 or 27 novels, how much ever it has been at this point that they've written, like it's just built on a whole other level for me. Yeah, honestly, what else is there to see? Like, I'm sure anybody who's watching this video has probably read at least one of these series. You get it, you understand. So yeah, I think that's really all I have to see at this point. That's my top 10, I guess. Yeah, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching. As usual, links to the previous videos are in the description. And if you've been following along with the installments in this, thank you very much for especially much for watching, because it's been quite a journey to get this done. And I am debating doing something similar next year with a certain other type of book, but that's something I really need to sit and think about. So let's see where that goes. So yeah. Thank you very much for watching.